So these weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, most Jewish communities have the custom, we read a chapter of Ethics of Our Fathers. Each week there are 6 chapters, and you have 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. So each week another chapter. Usually it's read Shabbos afternoon between Mincha and Ma'ariv. Other communities like Chabad community, we continue reading it until Rosh Hashanah. There are actually a number of different practices to when it's read and how often it's read and how many are read. But this is the universal custom is certainly between Pesach and Shavuot, and then the Chabad goes till Rosh Hashanah. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one passage in Pirkei Avot that we're going to be reading this coming week, chapter 3, Mishnah 17. You can see Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. Literally, Avot just means fathers. Pirkei means chapters. So chapters of our fathers, or ethics, in English referred to as Ethics of Our Fathers. Perek Gimel, chapter 3, Mishnah Yud Zayin, Mishnah number 17. Okay, as Ethics of Our Fathers, just by the way, although it's part of the corpus of the Mishnah, it's unique in that the rest of the Mishnah deals with law, strict letter of the law. Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, as Rabbi would cite to Maharal's introduction, is mostly beyond the letter of the law. Referencing a Gemara which says a person who wants to be a chassid, a person who wants to be pious beyond the letter of the law should study these Ethics of Our Fathers. Okay, so he used to say, I'm reading the English here, anyone whose wisdom exceeds his good deeds, so he's got a lot of knowledge, but doesn't act much, doesn't act, I guess, on his knowledge. We'll see some of the commentaries. To what can he be compared? To a tree whose branches are numerous, but whose roots are few. So this Mishnah is comparing wisdom to branches and deeds to roots. So a person has lots of wisdom, so lots of branches, but few deeds, then he's got few roots. And therefore the wind comes and uproots it and turns it upside down. As it is stated, and he should be like a lonely tree in an arid land and shall not see when good comes. He shall dwell on parched soil in the wilderness, on salt land, not inhabitable. Okay, so too much wisdom, no action, no behavior to match his wisdom. That's like big branches, lots of wisdom, no roots, no action, and therefore tree falls over. But anyone whose good deeds exceeds his wisdom, to what? So it's a reverse. To what can he be compared? So it's right. The wisdom are the branches, deeds are the roots. So if this person has lots of deeds and less wisdom, or more deeds than wisdom, then he's compared to a tree whose branches are few, not a lot of branches, not lots of wisdom, but his roots are numerous, got lots of strong roots because there's a lot of action, a lot of good deeds. So that even if all the winds in the world were to come and blow against it, they could not move it from its place because he's got lots of roots, lots of action, lots of good deed. As it is stated, and it should be like a tree planted by waters toward the stream, spreading its roots, and it shall not feel when the heat comes, and its foliage shall be verdant. Don't know what that word is. What's the Hebrew? Yeah. Okay. In the year of drought, it shall not worry, because he's right next to the stream, nor shall it cease from yielding fruit. Okay. So this is the statement of this Mishnah. And essentially what it's really saying is, on the basic level, is that having vast amounts of knowledge is not really of any use if it's not grounded roots in good deed. So a person is very smart, a lot of information, but if he doesn't behave properly, then the whole thing falls over. But if the person is well grounded in a good behavior, then even if there's not as much wisdom, this is a much more solid tree because the person has got good behavior, good deeds. So it's highlighting the importance of behaving properly over and beyond having lots of beautiful information. But what's interesting is, now this theme that action is of primary importance, behaving properly is more important than thinking and philosophizing, is a theme that comes up quite a bit in Ethics of Our Fathers. This is not the only place which would have such a statement. There's a number of times where this comes up. But what's unique here is the comparison to trees, in which we're comparing action, good behavior, to roots, and wisdom to branches. When you would think of it actually as the reverse, because you would think ordinarily that wisdom is the root, and then on wisdom, you build action, right? So it seems kind of reverse, even though the point he's making is clear, that a person must have, or it's more important that a person have good behavior than lots of philosophical ideas. That's clear. But the comparison to the trees, what's interesting, because he's comparing wisdom to branches and actions to roots, when you would think of it in the reverse, right? You have a solid understanding, that's your foundation, and then you want to build on top of it good behavior based on your knowledge. So you would think that knowledge, information is the roots, and then the tree is the action. But here it's the reverse, where the action is compared to the roots and wisdom to the branches. And we're going to look at a number of different commentaries that address essentially this question. And the final commentary is going to be from the Rebbe, and we're going to go through a few of them. So I'm not going to read them all inside of the Hebrew. Unfortunately, I don't have them in English. But you could just see them here on the screen, and maybe I'll point to a few words that will make the point. So the first is Rabbeinu B'chaye. He writes, he says, okay, you can read it. It's quick 3 lines, so we'll read it and translate. Yuadua, it's well known. Ki amidis hamitios, proper character. Srichos hein, they require lapulis, to action. Bapulis, and behavior, action. Mamidos es hadeos, they solidify one's character. Mekaimus oisan, and they keep them strong. Kiva chikena, therefore, Misha chachmasim meruba maisav, one whose wisdom exceeds his action. The metaskayim chachmasai, with what shall his wisdom be rooted and founded? Shiadeya hatzrichel shehi hadas, which is, this wisdom is like his character, is his information. Hatzrichel apula, which needs action. Okay, so to explain what he's saying, he's not speaking, he doesn't say this clearly, but it would seem to me that what he's saying is as follows. Instead of thinking of the Mishnah speaking in terms of informational wisdom and action, think of it more as a character that a person is trying to build. And it seems to me that what he's saying is to follow the advice of Maimonides in his Book of Laws, as well as actually Maimonides' introduction to Pirkei Avot, the famous 8 chapters. So Maimonides gives practical advice or mental exercise to build good character. And he writes, he borrowed from Greek philosophy. He actually admits that it's from there. Anyway, the idea is that a person should behave in accordance with the character they're trying to acquire. And the more they routinely behave accordingly, the more they'll acquire that character. So say a person felt like he needed to learn to be more charitable, let's say. Okay, so what do? Do actions of charitability. And with routine, continuous, consistent acting charitably, eventually the person's character will catch up and the person will become more generous. And that seems to be what Rabbeinu B'chaye is saying in terms of this Mishnah. And why he's referring to action as roots and wisdom as branches. Because what he's trying to say is that if you want to have proper wisdom, meaning to say, you want to have proper character trait, it must be rooted in action. Because you can have all the great ideas of what you should be like, but if you don't have actions to exercise those ideals, your ideals will never take root. They'll never really stick. So a person thinks, I really ought to be more forgiving or something like that. Okay, so that's an idea. That's the chachma, that's the wisdom, that's the branch. But what's it going to be rooted in if you want that to stick? So says Rabbeinu B'chaye, you got to have lots of roots, lots of action. Act forgivingly, and eventually you will acquire that chachma, that character trait. So this is one way of understanding this Mishnah, in that action doesn't, action as a root refers to repeated actions that will solidify a character trait. And that's what wisdom here means. Wisdom doesn't just mean someone who's very smart, but wisdom means someone who has some idea of some character of what they should be. You want to acquire that character? Good. Ground it in lots of action. Make lots of roots on which you can build that character or acquire that character trait. So this is one way of reading the Mishnah, and it's very interesting. The next we have is the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel writes something also very interesting. It's just, I like to do this way of learning. It kind of gives us an idea of the layers and layers of one text. And you can see how different scholars read the same piece of information, the same words in the same text. Okay, so second way of reading this text. Abarbanel writes like this. When the Mishnah says wisdom, what he means is the capacity for you to discover truth using your own mind. By curious investigation, analyzing the world, considering and philosophizing and thinking, your ability to use your own mind to arrive at some truth. That's wisdom. Action, that is one's commitment to Torah and mitzvahs. Because, as we'll see more, the commitment to Torah and mitzvahs isn't necessarily built on, I figured it out. But to some degree, it's because this is the way Hashem wants it. So he says like this. So when the Mishnah says action, as in the roots, it's not referring to only just deeds, it's referring to a commitment to Torah and mitzvahs, referred to as action. Wisdom, the Mishnah doesn't necessarily mean wisdom of Torah, it means your ability to find truth using your own mind. Now he says the Abarbanel something beautiful, like this. Wisdom, investigating and trying to find the truth using your own mind, beautiful. But if it isn't grounded on a faith in Torah and mitzvahs, then like the Mishnah said, any wind arrives and it's blown over. If I'm only using what I think, what I seek as in my mind, using my own limited intellect as to what the truth is, then one day I'm introduced to one idea, I think that's the truth. The next day I read something else, and that becomes the truth. The next day I read something else, and that becomes the truth. And my perception of what's true and what's good is constantly changing, and it's like the tree that has no roots that's constantly being blown over by the wind. But if I have strong roots in Torah and mitzvahs, this is the truth based on our tradition, based on, as he says here, apia Torah v'anavua, based on the Torah and the prophecies of Torah, and based on revelation from Sinai. And this is who we are. I'm a Torah Jew. If that's a solid grounding, and that's my roots, then I can have all the philosophical investigation I want, and I'm not going to be blown by the wind by every new, whatever idea is in vogue for today. That's what I'm going to accept. I'm not suspect to every time, the winds of change, the winds of whatever is in vogue at the time, whatever is fashionable to think at the time. I'm not just going to go along with it because I have strong roots in my faith in Torah and mitzvahs. So this is the second approach to the same text, both equally very interesting, right? So the first one was action is roots that ground us in solidifying a certain character trait. That was one way of understanding it. The second way of understanding it now is that our roots is our commitment and faith in Torah and mitzvahs. And on top of that, I can build all my philosophical ideas. And then the philosophical ideas will be strong, grounded, because it's built on roots of faith in Torah and mitzvahs. So that's approach number 2 to this very same text. Okay, approach number 3. This comes from Rabbi Avram Azulai, Moroccan scholar. And he writes the following. The Mishnah here is referring to the attitude with which one learns Torah. What's the attitude with which one learns Torah? Does a person learn Torah just to acquire information? then it's not going to be grounded learning. But a person should rather learn Torah in such a way that he's trying to find, how should I behave? Like the Hasidim would say that everything must have a bachein. Bachein in Hebrew, uvachein, like bet chaf nun, means and therefore. Everything has to have and therefore. What's the and therefore? As if to say, you spend studying all this beautiful ideas and you studied something in Hasidus and it's all very nice and lofty, and therefore, what does it mean to me? How do I make it relevant and personal to me? I think I've shared this story in the past. It's a wonderful story and it really demonstrates this point. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who once spoke here at the MTC, shares the following. Rabbi Simon Jacobson is a renowned scholar of Hasidic philosophy. He spent many of his early years as one of the people who, in the late 80s and the 90s, was probably one of the chief people responsible for memorizing and recording the Rebbe's Shabbos talks. They would speak on Shabbos for hours, no tape recorder. So there was people who were trained in memorizing what the Rebbe had said and then transcribing it later. So this is Rabbi Simon Jacobson. So you can imagine he obviously has very deep understanding and knowledge of Torah and Chassidus, as he's sitting there memorizing the Rebbe's talks for hours and then transcribing it to paper after Shabbos. So he says that because he was involved in transcribing the Rebbe's talks, so he kind of had access to ask the Rebbe questions that maybe others didn't have, because he's in a constant basis, constant touch with the Rebbe, like, I'm transcribing your talk, I understood it this way, did I get it right, did I get it wrong? So he's constantly in touch, and he had this kind of access that maybe others didn't. Now he says at the time, he was teaching Tanya to the girls' high school in Beis Rivka, in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, called Beis Rivka, the girls' high school. Now the title page of Tanya, the author, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, writes that the book of Tanya is built on the verse which reads, Ki karov elecha davar ma'od, for the matter is very near to you, in your heart, in your mouth, to get it done. Which basically means the book of Tanya is based on the verse to explain how it is indeed accessible for everyone to serve God with their heart. Right? The verse says it's karov ma'od, it's exceedingly close to you to serve God with your heart. How is it exceedingly close? It seems very difficult. And therefore, writes the Alter Rebbe, this book Tanya is founded upon explaining just that, how it's accessible and close to serve God. So Rabbi Simon Jacobson asked the Rebbe, can I translate this word karov, which I translated to mean close, because that's the literal translation, karov ma'od, very close, or karov in modern Hebrew. So he asked the Rebbe, can I translate that word not as close, but as relevant? Relevant. Now let's translate the verse. For the matter is very relevant to you to serve God with your heart and with your mouth and to get it done. So he changed the meaning here. That Tanya is built on making Torah relevant to our personal lives. So he asked the Rebbe, can I do that? Can I translate the word karov as relevant? And the Rebbe put a check, as if to say, yes. Tanya is built on making Torah relevant. And that seems to be what Rabbi Azulai is saying here. When a person learns Torah, there's lots of wisdom, but is it relevant to his personal life? Is he learning it with the intention to have some actionable change? Then it's going to be upheld. So those are the roots that ground his learning, his wisdom. He's learning lots and lots of Torah, but is he learning it with the intention of some actionable change in his life? And if the answer is yes, good, then his Torah is upheld. If not, and he's just learning for the sake of it, because he wants to acquire knowledge and he wants to be a very smart person, or maybe even because he enjoys learning about God. But if it doesn't have the bachein, if it doesn't have the therefore, what's the actionable change it means to me? What's the relevance? Then that Torah is going to be overturned like the tree that doesn't have roots. So here we have, I think this was interpretation number 3, right? Interpretation number 1 is, if we want to acquire a character trait, we need to ground it in action. Interpretation number 2 is, if we want to use our intelligence to discover truth, it's got to be grounded in our faith in God and Torah and mitzvahs. And number 3 is, when we learn, our learning should be grounded in the hope of some personal relevance and actionable change in our lives, and not just learning for the hypothetical. So that was interpretation number 3 to the very same Mishnah, describing wisdom as branches and action as roots. Okay. So we'll go down to okay, we'll do one more before we go to the Rebbe's interpretation. Okay, so this comes from a book called Midrash Chachamim, and I don't have the name of the author here. Oh, here it says Maharam Alshka. That's it. Okay. So he writes as follows. The Mishnah is referring to a leader. And it's referring to a leader's capacity to communicate. And he says like this. The wisdom, the branches, are a reference to his communication, right? Roots are under the ground, below the surface, and then branches come above the surface. So I have roots within me. I have my own feelings and my own ideas. They stay inside of me. And then the branches that come out of me, that's like my speech, my communication to the world outside of me. And therefore, says this commentator, if I want my words to be heeded, then my words, my branches should be few, but my action should be a lot more. And then people will actually listen to what I have to say. But if I preach, lots and lots of branches, so it's lots of wisdom. People are getting lots of information from me because I'm right. We're talking about wisdom here in form of speech. And I'm sharing lots of wisdom, lots of branches, lots of words coming out of me. But if the people don't see in me as a leader that I'm acting accordingly, then I'm going to be blown right over. No one's going to listen. Because my branches, my wisdom that I'm sharing is not rooted in true action that backs up everything I'm saying. But if a leader has strong roots, which means he has lots of good behavior and good character, and people see that, and the speech, his branches, the wisdom he shares is very few, but people will listen. Because that wisdom is grounded on very strong character and very strong action. So here we have interpretation number, I think it's 4 already, or we're at 5, I don't remember. Wait, I think it's number 4. Yeah, interpretation number 4 to the same Mishnah, right? Looking at the Mishnah again. Wisdom is branches and roots are action. So interpretation 1 is action is the roots that will ground our character. Interpretation number 2 is our faith in Torah mitzvahs. That's the action. Those are the roots upon which we can build the branches of our intellectual ideas. Number 3 is our learning, our wisdom must be for the sake of actionable change and not just theoretical. So it's got to be, our learning has to be grounded. And interpretation number 4 is that our branches, when we speak wisdom, it should be much less than the character we back our wisdom up with. The wisdom we share with others, the branches, what we speak to others should be much less than what we do and demonstrate by example. And then our words will be heeded. But if our words and our wisdom we share, we have lots of advice for the whole world and lots of ideas, maybe it's all good, but if it isn't backed up with good action and good character, no one's going to listen to it. It's going to be blown over on the wind. Interpretation number 4. Okay. Okay, interpretation number 5 here, before we get to the Rebbe. He basically addresses the question straight on as to why action is referred to as roots. And he explains as follows. Actions are roots because roots are in the ground and our bodies were made from the ground, right? Adam's body is fashioned from the ground, from the earth, and then God blows into his nostrils a soul of life. So his life, his consciousness comes from heaven and his body comes from the earth. Now our actions are done with our body, which is why he refers to action as roots, because roots are in the ground and our body comes from the ground. So our actions are our earthly part of ourselves. Our branches, which reach up to the heaven, that's our spiritual side. Our souls, that are blown into us from heaven, right? So roots equals earth, body. Branches reaches to the heaven equals soul. So what's the Mishnah then saying? That there has to be more branches, more roots than branches, so more body than soul? It explains like this. He says, no. What this means is, are your actions small or are your actions large? Meaning to say like this, not lots and little in terms of quantity, how many branches, how many roots you have and how little roots you have. But when the Mishnah says lot and little, it means qualitatively. Is our physical activity petty and just for the sake of me, just I want, that's considered small action, even if there's a lot of behavior, but it's small in its quality because it's petty and selfish. But if, on the other hand, our action is qualitatively large, that is to say, even our physical conduct is infused with a sense of spirituality. Now we've taken the wisdom, we've taken the branches that come from our soul and infused it into our branches, into our bodily activity, giving it a qualitative bigness. And that's what the Mishnah means when it says someone who has lots of deeds, it's like lots of branches. It doesn't mean lots quantitatively, it means lots qualitatively. If a person's actions are qualitatively worth more than just their physicality, then his wisdom is worthwhile. Then the soul coming into his body is worthwhile if his body behaves not just as a petty body that runs after its own desires, but it's qualitatively bigger because it's been spiritualized. Then it's worthwhile. Then it's not the kind of tree that will blow over. So he's translating lots and little, not as a lot of behavior or little behavior, but rather the same behavior we're doing: eating, drinking, going to work, interacting with friends, all regular human behavior. Are they small qualitatively because it's just petty, selfish behavior, or are they large qualitatively because it's been infused with soul? And if it's large qualitatively and it's been infused with soul, then indeed it's big branches, it's big roots, because my roots, my physical behavior has been elevated and therefore they're much bigger, upon which I can truly build my wisdom, my spiritual life. That's the fifth interpretation to the same text. Now we finally get to the Rabbi's interpretation. So the Rebbe reads like this. We shouldn't think of it as a tree that's right side up, where its roots are in the ground and its branches are reaching to the heavens. Turn it upside down. Roots are in heaven and the branches extend below. Now, why would I do that? So he explains, because as we learn in Kabbalah, the soul descends into the body. Now, not the entirety of the soul is invested in the body. There are conscious parts of the soul that we are consciously aware of, and that's indeed in our body. And we live by that conscious soul. But then there are parts of the soul that still retain its attachment to up there, still retain its attachment to its spiritual source. And those parts of the soul are more, if you will, subconscious, or more precisely, supraconscious, rather than just ordinary conscious. So explain a little bit what I mean. So, for example, you have your ability to think, even the godly soul's ability to think. That's a conscious process by which I develop my understanding of God, let's say, my appreciation for God, and then I behave accordingly, I serve accordingly, right? So when we're talking about serving God at that level, then my service of God at this level is built on my appreciation of God, my understanding of God, and so on. But then there is a part of me that's not so much how much I understand about God and what I appreciate about Torah, mitzvahs, and whatnot. It's much deeper than that. I am Jewish, and I'm existentially and intrinsically attached to God, and therefore I serve him. I understand, don't understand, more or less, doesn't make a difference. I'm attached to God, and that's why I serve him, period. That's not a conscious feeling. It couldn't be a conscious feeling, because I can't explain it. So I don't know if subconscious is the right word, but maybe supraconscious is the right word. It's existential. It's just who I am. It's my roots. my spiritual roots. So there's the Rebbe's interpretation of roots versus branches. Action versus wisdom. Wisdom, the branches that come down from heaven, invested into my conscious body, into my conscious mind, that's me serving God based on the way I understand God, the way I appreciate God. And if that's the extent of my serving God based on my wisdom, based on my appreciation, then I can fall in favor, I can fall out of favor, and the wind blows it one way and the other. But if my service of God is built on my roots, my spiritual roots, the part of me that's attached to God, irrespective of what I think or don't think, and that's how I serve God. Now, this service of God is called action because the word in Hebrew for action is ma'asav. Right? You can see the word here, kol shem ma'asav. Ma'asav means actions, but ma'asav can also be read as me'aseh, which means to compel. Not just to act, but to compel. And this is the part of me that compels me to serve God, even if I don't understand it, because it's my root. It's what I'm attached to spiritually. And if that's how I serve God because I am existentially attached to him, irrespective of how I feel or don't know or don't know. This is my roots. And it compels me to serve him because I can't be any other way. A Jew can't be any other way. I have no other way but to serve God because this is who I am, in my roots, my spiritual roots, my roots in heaven, not roots in the ground. If that's the way I serve God, then no wind can move me. And irrespective of what is going on in the world around me or what's going on even in my own head, it doesn't matter. At the root of who I am, my spiritual root compels me to serve God no matter what. So here we have 5 interpretations for one text. Right? So, and we'll recap them very quickly. The first one was the roots are action that will solidify our character. Right? If we keep on behaving a certain way, we'll acquire that character. The second idea was that the roots of our faith in Torah mitzvahs that's the roots upon which we can build our ability to philosophize about the truth, because it's founded on our faith in Torah mitzvahs and therefore doesn't waver. Interpretation number 3 is that our learning, our wisdom, should be with the intention of actionable change, and that's the proper way to learn, not just to learn for theory. Right? So the learning, the branches should be rooted in the actions, in that we're learning for the sake of change, of actionable change rather than theoretical. Number 3 is that our branches, our wisdom, is the wisdom we share with others. And the wisdom we share with others should be much less than our deeds that lead others in reality. Because if we don't do much but talk a lot, people aren't going to listen. Interpretation number 4 is that our actions, the roots, are in the ground, and if they are small, they are petty, then it's meaningless. But only when these actions are qualitative, because I've infused them with spirituality, I've infused them with my branches that reach to the heavens, then those roots are strong and big qualitatively. Not that I am doing any more, but they're qualitatively greater because I've elevated my physical behavior. And finally, the Rebbe's interpretation, which is that my roots are in heaven. My spiritual roots is my existential attachment to God, which remains true no matter what I think or don't think. And if that's the way I serve God, with that existential attachment, then it never wavers. But if I serve God based on the branches of my soul that comes into my conscious, then my service of Hashem is limited to what I feel and what I don't feel, my mood, and what the world says around me, and so on and so forth. So this is a beautiful demonstration of the multi-layers of one text. And this is only 5 interpretations. I'm sure if I spent another hour doing more research, I could find another 10. But it kind of gives us a glimpse into this. And each of these 5 interpretations are worthy in their own right. And to conclude, the point of all this is that it should lead to some actionable change, and that we actually change the way we hopefully behave based on at least one of these, if not all of these interpretations. So thank you for the opportunity, and have a wonderful rest of your week. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask any questions.
Thank you so much. It was so good.
That was great. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That was excellent. Yeah, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was very insightful. Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and a wonderful rest of the
too.
week. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for listening.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.